audiences across the globe with her ability to embody an array of real-life and imagined characters. She masterfully demonstrates how to use one's platform for good. Our guest is not only a United Nations Messenger of Peace, she is also the founder of the Charlize Theron Africa Outreach Project, an organization that invests in the health, communities, and education of African youth and their ability to keep themselves safe from HIV/AIDS. Today, we are chatting with her about Revolution with a Mission. Please join me in welcoming Academy Award-winning actress, film and TV producer, and United Nations Messenger of Peace, Ms. Charlize Theron. Charlize, happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and at a time that everyone's just looking for inspiration, purpose, and personal revolutions in this pandemic. So how are you carrying on?
I think we are all just keeping our heads above water and figuring it out. It's been quite an evolution in the last, gosh, now it's almost 2 years. I can't believe that. But you know, we are looking at life differently, and we're making it work. And look, here we are. At least we get to talk to each other, and the conversation continues. And so that's all good.
And I'm glad that you mentioned evolution. And yeah, it's been over 2 years since you were last home in South Africa, right? I mean, that's the longest you've ever been away because of the COVID restrictions. What do you miss the most?
I miss the people. You know, I think that like all things in life, we don't necessarily always understand the value of that in-person experience that we get until we lost it the way we did in the last 2 years. And I think a huge part of what I've been longing for is to be able to be in person with a lot of the students and young people that we work with in South Africa. And not having access to that in the last 2 years have definitely, for me, been the thing that I've missed the most. To just be able to sit in a room and hug while sharing stories. And, you know, of course, I also miss the food because we have excellent food.
Which one do you miss?
Well, we have a South African snack that's called biltong, and it's basically cured dried meat, and it's kind of a South African staple. And so there are some butchers here in California who make it, but it's never quite as good as what you get in South Africa.
For sure. And you spoke about access to people, access to vaccines has really been a key issue. I mean, what's going on in South Africa mirrors some of the most fragile places. And I don't have to look very far because it includes the Philippines, where I'm from. And it's a fight that you've taken to the global stage to end COVID. So how are you gauging global efforts at achieving herd immunity?
I think for us at CTOP, we have really longstanding and trusting relationships with our partners on the ground, partners in South Africa. And so we really try to stay in communication and to really understand that, you know, we have to be able to hear what they say to us and to really understand how we can kind of meet them and find the resources that they need in order to do the great work that they're already doing. And so I think having that open communication for us is really important. And so we look for information on all fronts. Things are constantly changing, like you just said. There's a constant evolution in life, and I think this work is very much constantly changing. And so you have to be able to kind of bend and change. And when the first lockdown kind of globally happened, and we were hearing from our partners in South Africa, it became very clear that it was going to be a dire situation. And so I think for us, it's important to not only talk about equity and equality for young people and for marginalized groups, but to also understand that now, looking at where we are in this present day with COVID, we have to really have a true conversation about accessibility for the whole global community. And South Africa, as you just said, with the Philippines and many other countries, are not necessarily up to par with what's happening in other places in the park. And so the conversation, I think, has to continue because it will be marginalized groups who will be hurt the most.
Yeah, that conversation continues in a broader sense when you come to think of the uptick in the gender-based violence during the COVID-19 lockdowns, and you've carried on a campaign alongside that.
Yes, we did. We started a campaign called Together for Her. And it really was just an attempt to start a conversation and to also really ask women, very powerful women, not only in my industry, but on a global front, to really um, lead an effort where we could really be the message, and that the message was that this was really happening, that globally gender-based violence was at an all-time high. In countries like South Africa, we knew that we were looking at something that was going to get completely out of control because of a lack of resources. And then obviously also what was life-saving for a lot of people really meant that they had to stay locked down in an environment with an abuser. We know that domestic violence went up by a huge percentage, and we were looking at more than 30 million more cases. And it really, really is so vital to engage with grassroots organizations who work in communities who really, really, truly know where those resources will be allocated the best. And so coming together with EIF and CARE Foundation, starting Together for Her, really amped up that conversation. And we got to put some really good, I think, over $1 million towards great organizations that were already doing great work globally.
So given that there's a rise in gender-based violence as well as the problem we face with the access to vaccines, do you think COVID has set back the goal to end AIDS by 2030?
For sure. And, I'm not an expert. I really look to my friends at the Global Fund for their statistics and what they're going to come up number-wise as to what that actually really means. But we know for a fact that COVID has set us back in many ways, not just in COVID, with HIV and AIDS, but also on obviously gender-based violence, but also a lot of other things. We realize that we're dealing with communities who are in very rural parts of the country, and we also know that looking at the whole of South Africa, 8.2 million people who are HIV positive have immune issues already. And so when you look at those communities and you realize that they're going to be last in line to get vaccines, you can see the trickle down effect of what it's really going to mean in the long run, not just for HIV AIDS, but for, I think, for a global understanding of global health in a lot of communities, but for sure in South Africa.
So what do we need to do to tackle the widening inequality?
Well, I think this is a great start, right? I really believe that constant, continued conversation, debate around these issues, put them out in the forefront. And the more we can turn that light on in the room and not have it be so dark, share our feelings and our experiences with each other, acknowledge when we're wrong. And for me personally, the last 2 years have been moments of great reflection and really truly understanding, my part as a white woman and my privilege and how that comes into play in my every single day life and how that affects other people. Looking at my business and how I run that, and am I responsible in creating opportunity that will only enrich my company as far as storytelling goes, because we know great stories come from diverse voices. And so I think we obviously keep the conversation going. We don't forget about this. And I think we are definitely in a place where all of that is definitely happening. And I think the pressure that we're putting on our representatives to really understand that there is a systemic change that really needs to happen in order for things to truly go away, that continued pressure, I think, is important too.
And then there's the conversation of Afghanistan. You've joined calls to protect and support Afghan women and girls following the turmoil there. Why is this important to you?
Well, I mean, it's important on many fronts, right? I think there's an apathy that we all have when we see the images of Afghanistan and what's going on there right now. But knowing the history of women in that country and where they kind of place in their society, we know some of the brutal actions they've taken against them, the lack of them being able to go to school. We've also seen in the last 20 years how all of those things have kind of been changed and presented to a new generation who doesn't know life under the Taliban. And so I think that there is an importance for us globally to not forget each other. Yes, there's been mistakes made, but this is where we're at right now. And I think that as a community, when we come together globally, that's when true change happens. And so I think for us as a world to not acknowledge the fear that a lot of women and young girls are facing in Afghanistan right now, and to not understand what that could mean as a trickle down effect for a lot of other women in other countries, would be, I think, very ignorant.
And we've seen that spark in the Me Too movement. I mean, ultimately, you've urged women to support each other in the way that the Me Too movement encouraged women to speak up. So do you see the campaign as a roadmap for other movements?
Looking at a blueprint as something that works for everybody, looking at a one size fits all for any kind of movement that wants to make real change is definitely not something that I think is a successful model to look at. I think being open and really listening to what that movement is going to need is probably more important. But we can definitely look back and see how certain things where there's correlation or there's a continuous thread that you could look at that is similar to what you're trying to accomplish with the movement, is definitely a learning experience for sure. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a recipe for these things that works for all circumstance.
Let's just take a step back and go into your earlier years. You grew up in South Africa when the AIDS pandemic hit really hard. What impact did this period have on you?
Interestingly enough, I was around the age that my oldest daughter is right now, going through this pandemic. And I wonder how she will remember this part of her life. I know that for myself, there was a tremendous amount of fear in not knowing, I feel like where we are in science today and having accessibility to understanding viruses more, not just more rapidly, but also just having access to that information, didn't exist when I was around her age. And so it took us a lot longer to get the information as to what HIV was, how you got it. There was so much misinformation around it. And I think as a child, that was incredibly frightening. I mean, not just for me. I know that for us as a country, it was very frightening. It was also something that personally touched us as a family. We know of many families that we knew of, that we worked with closely, who, mysteriously would pass away. And sometimes the answer was given that it was tuberculosis or sometimes other illnesses. And I think it was pretty set then for me, even as at that age, no matter what I was going to do in my life or where I was going to end up in my life, that somehow that would always be part of my memory and kind of what formed me as a human, just experiencing that. And in order to be a human that feels of service, it was a very natural place for me to later in my life look upon and say, okay, this is first of all a very immediate need in a country that I feel very, very close to. And also, once you've personally experienced those things, it's really hard to kind of not be proactive, especially in something that is 100% preventable. We know how to not get infected. And having access to that knowledge was something that to me was really frustrating, knowing that there was maybe an entire younger generation that was not going to have access to that simple life-saving information.
And you've specifically picked the young people in South Africa. Your lens, HIV/AIDS prevention, and your goal, equity. Why the young people in South Africa?
Well, it started with the fact that when the AIDS epidemic hit South Africa, we've lost an entire generation of parents. And the amount of children that were orphaned or left with one parent, and in some cases just a grandparent, were really growing up having zero access to that life-saving information we were just talking about. And I think it to me looked like a cycle that would just continue if we only invested in immediate need of sick people, which obviously was a very, very, and is a very important thing. But it's also not the only thing that's going to get us to seeing the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to this virus. And there was just a real gap in funding in supporting organizations that were working in the trenches with communities that are being hit so incredibly hard. And we knew by the time that we launched CTOP in 2007, from information that we got from the UN and from other organizations, that women and young girls were really 8 times more likely to become HIV positive. And we also knew that they were the ones that were falling through the cracks more than anybody. So our focus really zeroed in on that part of those communities. It obviously does not mean that our work lives in a vacuum and we only do that, but that is definitely the underlying part of our work. But it is hard to go into communities and not understand that there has to be access to all of these life-saving tools, not just for young people, but also for their families and for their communities and for the schools that they go to.
So, given the current circumstances, how are you now adapting in the way that the pandemic has sped up the school dropouts and the domestic violence?
You have to just kind of stay in touch with those organizations, and you have to really take in the information that they give you, because they are living it, they're there, and they are constantly speaking to the members of their community. And so we get a true sense of what COVID is doing and how gender-based violence is really affecting those communities. And we really listen to them. They're the experts. They're the ones that have all the answers. And really, we are the fortunate ones who get to bring access to resources and maybe connect some of our organizations with other organizations. Or sometimes it is on a bigger global stance of understanding that we have access to relationships with bigger organizations that can maybe come in and help with certain things. But we definitely had to realize that we needed access to vaccines as fast as possible. And that's obviously an ongoing issue in South Africa. But understanding where those communities are and where those people are through our trusted relationship with our organizations, that's our life force. That's our rescue rope, right? That's how we know where we have to really zero in.
That's very true. Allowing you to make that pivot, and I understand that all it took for CTAOP to get started back then was just a mobile health unit and a mobile computer lab. So basically, it was technology enabling advocacy on that community grassroots level.
Yeah, so in 2007, we co-partnered in launching, I think it was 3 mobile clinics, and it did have a technology side to it for sure, but it was trying to bring health saving information to communities where there really was no infrastructure, and also just trying to take the funding that we had and to try and stretch it as much as we possibly could to reach as many people as possible. And so mobile clinics was an idea that was brought to us that had been very successful in other areas. And so we kind of ran with that idea. And it was a really successful program. And it was also, I think, the beginning of our learning journey and really truly understanding through that first part of our launch what was really needed. And also understanding that, this idea of trying to work in the HIV/AIDS field doesn't really happen in any other way but holistically. And that took us some time to really hone in on and figure out how to make that part of the program work better. But it became very clear to us from launching the mobile clinics and having kids for the first time in their lives have access to the internet and to learn how to be able to use computers as a life skill, as a work skill for their future was definitely a huge part of that. And these are all things that I think we all take for granted. We're sitting here, we're using this great technology, we use it every single day, but that's not necessarily the case for a lot of bright, young, resilient, promising young people, not just in South Africa, but everywhere in the world. And if they had access to that skill, how that could maybe change their lives.
Talk to us about those kids. And pick up on the Youth Leadership Scholarship Program. It's now in its 4th year, relatively new, but stands at a pivotal moment in a pandemic where you're seeing education as a means to empower young women.
Yeah, so I love telling the story. The origins of our youth scholarship program really came from a young woman named Aya, who we met her in the Eastern Cape. I think it was in 2018. And we were lucky enough to sit in with a community meeting where a lot of young people were sharing some of their stories of what they've experienced and also problem solving. So in trying to problem solve, there was a moment where the conversation really kind of turned to, like, you know, asking for outside help. And this young woman, Aya, stood up and in the most determined voice said, I don't want change next year. I'm not waiting for change next month. And not tomorrow. I am waking up tomorrow and I'm making change happen for myself and for my community. And there was a commitment and a passion to the way she delivered those words that had us all pretty emotional. Um, we got in the van and drove back to where we were staying, which was maybe a 4-hour ride, and we all started talking about how empowering that moment was. And then we all started thinking, what would happen to somebody like Aya if she was extended a larger education? And the birth of our youth leader scholarship program really kind of came from that 2018 trip. And the belief in it still is that we can look to our community organizations to really help us find those students who have the hunger and the passion to want to continue their education and have the freedom to choose whatever field that is. And we allow them to have those scholarships wherever they want to go, wherever they can get in. And that's been a really exciting part for us because it really is for us investing in the understanding that when young girls and young boys get that further education, we know that no matter where they go in the world, a lot of what that experiences will come back into their communities.
Have you been in touch with Aya since?
Yes, yes. I talked to her about a month ago, and we stay in touch with all of our cohorts. And given the last 2 years, I'm very grateful for the access that we've had to this technology to be able to Zoom with a lot of our cohorts and to check in with them and to really truly understand the challenges that they're facing right now. Given just the circumstance of where they come from and the challenges that they have faced already, looking at over a year lockdown for them has been a real challenge in mental health. And so the conversation has really kind of been broadened to include that very extensively in the last year, and really understanding that young people are really mentally suffering from this lockdown and from the pressures of trying to keep their grades up and to be able to make their exams go down well, but also not having access to the things that I think we all need to be mentally healthy.
I mean, it's incredible how you just surface a lot of learnings from that true grassroots level through technology and using that to inform and amplify your advocacy. How are you staying grounded in what you do while keeping globally aware?
I've always been, I was raised by a mother who always used to say to me when I kind of got overwhelmed by things, you could just keep your head down and you do the work. And I think, maybe not so much in my 20s, but now in my older age, I've learned the value that comes from listening. And so I think that there is an importance to connect on a very personal level for me with organizations like the organizations that we support who work in the trenches. And then there is the understanding for me that I have been very fortunate to have had the luxury of being able to have a stage where I can maybe talk about these things to try and better some of them or to proactively move towards something that could make it better. And so, for me, not using that knowledge in a productive way whether it is through talking to you and reaching an audience in the Philippines to maybe understand the plight of a lot of young people in South Africa that they might relate to. Understanding that we are all so connected, right? That our stories are not that different from each other. It might just be the place and the language that's different. That we can kind of lean on each other in that sense. I think that's what gives me strength, and really truly believing that when we share as a global community, we can also lift each other up and help each other.
You know, one of the words I kept coming across reading anything CTAOP is Ubuntu, a South African philosophy you've often mentioned. I am because we are. How does that resonate with you in a time of pandemic?
Yeah, it's very much what we just discussed. You know, I think for me, um, I was fortunate enough to be raised by a parent who always made me, always, to the point where it was almost like, you know, as a kid, super annoying because there was this constant voice in the back of my head that would always say, you know, don't always just think about yourself. Think about what is happening outside of your world, outside of your bubble. And I think also a very early understanding of how when communities flourish, when people are doing well, when they are healthy, when they are happy, it means that it's not just corralled in that place. It trickles to a wider stage, to a wider global stage. And I think for me, that was very true when I was lucky enough to start traveling when I was 16. I think when you travel and you see other cultures, other countries, other communities, and how they live and how they are, like I said, not always that different from yourself. And maybe in the intriguing ways they are, and you're intrigued and you want to know more about those things. But I think at the core, as human beings, what I realized from the time that I could travel is that we really all need each other. And so Ubuntu is a kind of a I guess the proverb is something that I've lived, I feel like my whole life.
Mom is a repetitive refrain since the start of the chat. I'm glad you bring her up. She's really been a key person in your own empowerment. What has she meant for the way you think about what you stand for today?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I realized the embarrassment of a 46-year-old woman talking this much about her mother. And I also am in full acknowledgement that she just happens to be a pretty impressive human. And so I got really, really lucky that you know, that I got to spend that I still get to spend all this time with her. She's constantly still teaching me, not just through her words, but through her actions and how she lives her life through example. And I think on a more personal note, that definitely influences me as a mother and how I want to raise my two daughters. There were these incredible empowering moments with my mom that she enabled me to have as a young person that I think also influences outside of my own children, just the work that I do with young people and really understanding how powerful a positive message of challenging yourself or encouraging yourself or support, what that can do to a young person, because I am an example of that. And so I think that a lot of that, my inspiration around the work with young people comes from just how I have realized the value of having access to something like that, um, because I had that for myself.
She draws inspiration from you too. I mean, Mom got to flex her own acting chops with you in the cider house. What was the experience like with Mom on the big screen?
Oh, she's a scene stealer for sure. You know, that movie was a while back, but I strangely just found some Polaroids from that night when she was in hair and makeup, and we, you know, this was back in the day when we didn't have cell phones, and so we always had a Polaroid camera around. And I found some of the Polaroids, and I think it was on Mother's Day I posted some of those photos. And so it kind of like sparked for both of us. We were like, oh my gosh, like it's been so long. But she, of course, very quickly reminded me that the director kept asking her to leave the frame faster because she was stealing the moment. She was so good that nobody would look at me. And so we have a true disagreement about whether that was because she was so great or her face was just filling too much of the frame.
I'm sure she enjoyed the moment. Mom aside, I mean, women have also shaped your career in Hollywood, such as the late J.J. Harris, your agent, whom you've described as the biggest mentor of your life, and Patty Jenkins, who wrote and directed Monster, in which you'd won an Academy Award for. What impact did they have in the decisions you've made as an actor?
Yes, so J.J. Harris was started as my agent and then eventually just became my manager. And she was really, when I met her, I was, I think, 18 or 19. I had a very heavy South African accent. My English wasn't very good. I had never acted before. I had no credentials whatsoever. And I basically got very fortunate that somebody organized a meeting who knew her, organized a meeting for us. And so when we met, she had absolutely no reason to believe that I had any capability of being an actor, but she connected with something, and she saw something in me that I don't think anybody, including myself, even saw then. And she really was the first person, not just woman, but she was the first person in my career who said, don't settle for less. Know what you want and go for that. And by that I mean she never ever told me to just take jobs because they were jobs. She was always very kind of brave, and her encouragement to say, wait for the right thing. And that's a scary thing for a young actor when you start out. There's a part of you that feels like you just should take every job because you should be so lucky to get work. And then there's another part of you that also feels, especially I think for a lot of women, that you don't want to get typecast into this like one idea of what you are. And back then, that was definitely a really big issue. I feel like women back then, if they played one role, that was all they got to do. And then Hollywood would kind of like use that for 5 or 6 years, and then they would be done with that. And so she really made me brave in understanding that, yes, it was a risk, but it was a risk worth taking, and that I was worth that I was worth wanting more for myself and my career. Patty Jenkins, who is definitely a mentor and also a great friend. I'm seeing her next week. We haven't seen each other in a while. She's a force of nature, like a lot of women that I'm so fortunate to have in my life. I get to meet all these firecrackers, all these women who are just constantly pushing the boundaries and constantly kind of not taking no for an answer. And Patty is the epitome of that. If anything, she personifies that. The more you tell her no, the bigger she gets and the more aggressively she'll move forward. And so I absolutely love having her in my life, because I think we all need encouragement sometimes, right? When things are maybe not going as smoothly as you want them to go, or you get a little demoralized. To have that woman in your life that says, no, like you might not have the energy for this right now, but I'm gonna like give you some energy, and I've got your back, and keep going. And Patty Jenkins is definitely one of the many women like that I have in my life.
That courage, that bravery got you setting up Denver and Delilah Productions in 2003, where you championed those complex women characters such as in Atomic Blonde, Monster, Tully, Bombshell, just to name a few. What role do women play, do you think, in bringing forth these universal, diverse stories?
Well, I think more importantly, probably it would be for us to look at how there has been a lack of women telling those stories, right? And I think that's what has really been realized in the last couple of years. And also, I think much more celebrated and encouraged, and kind of space is created, I think, more now. And we obviously will need way more of it. But I think that there's a real movement with a lot of companies in my business who really understand the value that, like I said earlier, diverse voices bring to storytelling, and a huge part of that has been a lack of female voices being represented, and therefore we haven't really had that much exploration as far as female character, right? Not just people getting hired behind the camera, but what does the storytelling look like in the last 100, like even for just in writing or in paintings, like where have we really gotten our source of female stories? They've always kind of come from men, and in many cases, in parts of the world, women's voices have not necessarily been at that forefront. So I think it's a very important thing, and it's being finally recognized. And I think there's an incredible amount of pressure, and understanding that it's the right thing to do, and that we're only going to win it. We're going to get great stories, and the business side of it makes an enormous amount of sense too. When we look at female-led characters and what they do at the box office, I think Old Guard, a film that I just did with Netflix that came out during the COVID lockdown, was a great example of that too, with me and Kiki Lane in it, two women. And it was one of the most watched movies that they've ever had on Netflix. So the conversation around, women not being bankable, or that there's not an interest in female stories, is really one that we've, I think, put to sleep.
And one that you've put to a new phase here, getting started as an entrepreneur. I mean, what were the struggles and challenges like that you had to overcome setting up your own production company?
The biggest one is probably just, the one that I put on myself, which was that it was a new job, right? And I had to really, speaking of technology, when I started my company, there was no internet. So I remember vividly sitting with a book, the Producers for Dummies, like it was like a handbook on like learning how to produce. Of course, I was lucky enough to have some producer mentors that I got to work with early in my career, who really took me under their wing and realized that I had an interest in it. And so that was very helpful, to have access to people that I could call when I didn't know something. But yeah, you start out in anything, right? There's a good solid period where you kind of have to prove your muscle and what you can actually do, what your capability is. And that's always a tough period. And your business really kind of relies on that. So that's when I always, again, remember my mom's words: put your head down and do the work. And there was a good many years, I would say over a decade, where that work had to continue for us to get to the place where we are, producing big world movies with huge budgets, and continue to tell smaller, more intimate stories that we feel are necessary to be told, and to also venture out in a lot of television.
Are you aware of where you want to be in your venture?
For right now, yes. I think we're kind of past our capacity. It's, we're still very much a boutique business, and we personally develop every single thing that goes through the company. And so we've definitely grown in the last couple of years, and I think we're in a good place right now, and we've also set ourselves up in a really good place as far as development goes, coming into, hopefully, if we can get vaccines out there and get people safe and have this virus not make any more variants, get out and actually shoot some productions. So our development part of it is in a really, really good place. And now we just have to be able to actually go on location and make all of these incredible stories that we want to make.
Including a sequel to Old Guard, which everyone is looking forward to.
That's so sweet. Yeah, it's really nice how people have responded to that film. And we've been talking about a lot of the harder stuff that's definitely, we've had to kind of face in the last year and a half, but there's always the ability to look at the glass half full instead of half empty. And the Old Guard was definitely a part of the glass being half full. It was really nice to have that movie come out at the time that it did. I think it was something that was really needed, and people really responded to it in a way that made for the story to feel much bigger than I think it would have been if we weren't going through what we were going through. So I can look at that silver lining for sure.
The other part of that gender discussion is the men. I mean, you'd be the last to undermine the support of men as you advocate women empowerment, because directors such as Tom Hanks, Robert Redford, Woody Allen have been very supportive of your career as well. How do you see support from both genders as being part of the solution in the fight for equality and empowerment?
I just truly believe that these issues will never go away until we can get all of us engaged into it. I think it's we're mistaken if we think that this is something that we can just kind of split into a gender problem or a gender focus. I think that there's clear evidence that when you work with men who understand the value of women, the job becomes much easier. And I also think that we need each other. We really need each other. And I don't think that we should misunderstand that the lack of opportunities that we don't have for women in storytelling versus saying that we don't want men to tell stories or that men can't tell female stories. I don't think that's really necessarily the argument. It is really an understanding that when you look at 4% of female directors working in the last decade, that's a number that we have to change. But I still really love and value working with directors, great directors like Tom Hanks and Jason Reitman, who I think I've done some of my best work, and also very female-centered work. Obviously, we had a female writer on both those projects, Diablo Cody. But I would remiss if I didn't acknowledge the contributions that men have brought to a lot of the female stories that I've told. George Miller, who made Fury Road, Mad Max Fury Road. Furiosa was a character that I think a lot of people responded to in a sense because there was something revelatory about her that felt like a female story that wasn't told before. And that came from his voice and from his creative heart. So there's this old saying, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we don't want to do that. But what I love about all of the men that you mentioned, maybe I don't know about Woody Allen so much these days, but I really do believe that a lot of the men who I value in my working relationship and also in my life, this is not something that you need to explain to them. And they very, very much understand the mission that we all have to be on. And they're actively moving in that direction. I've had male directors say to me, you know what? This is not my story to tell. And I think that's such a beautiful way to start communicating what we take on, where our responsibility lies, and making room and space for the right people to tell those stories.
You mentioned your eldest daughter a little earlier, but you're mom to two daughters, August and Jackson. So you've got your hands full. It's a lot of work to be a parent. How are you managing to define or redefine work and life balance these days?
I think it's always a challenge to find a balance. I think that there's never a time that I have not found it to be a challenge. And I find sharing with other not just single parents, but I think just parents in general, working parents, you are always asking the question, is it too much? Am I home enough? How do I balance the needs of my child? Is this the best thing for us as a family? You're not just thinking of yourself in an insular way anymore. And I think that's just a constant evolution, right? So the good thing about that is that there's no doubt in my mind that they come first and that my family comes first and that I'm very lucky to have this job and I love it very much. But it doesn't even come close to that if there was a choice to be made between, what's good for my family or whether I would go do a movie. That's a no-brainer for me. So, but there's room, I think, for both. And right now, for sure, it might change in a couple of years. And so I'm just constantly kind of checking in and I talk to a lot of other moms in my situation. And but try to share stories. And I find in that to not be so alone and to feel like I know a lot of other moms who are going through this as well. So, and you get great advice. You get great advice. You get great ideas of how to manage things a little bit better.
Charlize, we got a lot of questions coming through the audience. One on sustainability. As one of the voices of the United Nations Global Goals for Sustainable Development, in your own words, how would you define sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sustainability is definitely something that has to be part of of the community that you work in, right? If we look at that on a global effort, on a global scale, I think sustainability is something that needs to be able to be sustained. And we have to look at all the factors that makes it sustainable. And I think having that awareness of what works in certain communities and what doesn't work in other communities, and understanding that it is not a one size fits all scenario is very important. But I think, to use an example, for us with CTOP, it was very important to understand the sustainability around what we wanted to do with communities in South Africa and also in other parts of Africa. Understanding that ultimately, whatever we bring to the table, that this is their choice and that their community, and that ultimately we have to create something that they can sustain, that can actually help them in the long run. And I think that ownership is a really important part of it, right? I get this question asked a lot, not this question, but a question like this: what is your, in the future, what is your dream role? And the interesting thing about where my career has gone and where I think it's going to go is just the surprise element, that not knowing. And so I try to live my life as authentic as possible, and to just live in my own truth, and to be inspired by the things that I really truly feel inspired by, and to get upset about the things that I just truly feel upset about, and to learn as much as I can. And I think my storytelling kind of is the same. I think, I'm intrigued by things that I don't know enough about, or things that might be scary. And just for me as a storyteller, that's always been an aspect of safety, not hiding from it, not running away from it. So maybe there will be a continuation in that. I know for some people, having kids really changed them as storytellers, but that hasn't necessarily happened for me. I mean, I want to be in more kids' movies because I want my kids to be able to watch some of them. Because the truth of the matter is, they're not going to see a lot of my movies until they're 52. So maybe some more kids' movies in the future.
Speaking of that, there's a sequel to The Old Guard happening anytime soon?
We are actively in pre-production. And we've just started our pre-production part of it.
And here's another question: what can we expect from Cypher in F9, the first female villain who shook the foundation of what Fast and Furious is all about?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. She is crazy. So I don't know. I think we're going to be really surprised, me included, by the way. I have not seen anything, so I'm not being I'm not being secretive at all. I really don't know where they want to go with it. I know they want to shoot next year, and so I'm sure at some point soon we'll start talking about the creatives. But the great thing about her is she's so insane. We can go anywhere with her, right? That's the good thing about that kid.
She's very interesting. As an actor, do you actively look for roles that champion empowered women, like your work in Atomic Blonde and Bombshell, or other films that feature other advocacies you push for?
The truth of that matter is that I don't necessarily have to look so far. There's so many great stories out there that really echo everything that you just said. And I think for me, it becomes more of a, well, this is great. Why wouldn't I want my company, or why wouldn't I want to do this, right? So we have access to a lot of great stuff out there. It really is just, we've been limited in having enough of a platform to actually showcase it. And I think streaming has been a game changer on that front. Having just the capability of places like Netflix or Amazon or all of these great streamers that we have now, and on top of that are theater showings. There's just there's room for more movies, more stories, and we get to hear stories that we've never heard from before. And I think that that's what's changed. There's so many great stories out there, and I find people have been really energized by movements like Me Too or Black Lives Matter, and really I'll say the people that I'm working with creatively have this real hunger to want to go and explore more of these stories, narratives with women.
Here's the next question. Of all the movie characters you played in Hollywood, which one can you relate to the most and why?
I mean, I really relate to all of them. On a human level, right? I don't know. I mean, I made a movie a couple of years back where I played. It was a western. It was a comedy western that I did with Seth MacFarlane, and I got to play this character who was just kind of like, I don't know, like there was something about her name was Anna, and I think she was probably the easiest character that I just kind of I realized like, oh, the more I just kind of lean into who I naturally am. Of course, it was a Western and it was set in a different time frame, and like all of that stuff came into play. But she found herself in circumstances, and how she kind of responded reminded me a lot of kind of like how I guess I would respond and things. But then there's also a lot of like things that we don't have in common. I don't know. It's a strange one to ever think of like any character that I played that it felt like that close to me. I think that would almost make me a little uncomfortable if it was too much like me.
Next question is, of all the multiple acting awards you've received, which one do you find most memorable or most significant for you and why?
They're all listen, every time somebody gives me an award, I'm always waiting for somebody to say, we've made a mistake. So
well, they certainly haven't.
That's so sweet. But obviously the Oscar was a pretty big one. I never in a million years thought that anything like that was even plausible, and it was an insane experience, and one that I think even in that moment, even though it's such an out of body experience, I had a real awareness of just how special it was and how grateful I was that I not won the award, but that I was given this opportunity by Patty Jenkins to play this part that people responded to the way that they did. And I think that was the thing that hit me. That was, I think, what the Oscar represented to me. A great opportunity. I think there are so many amazing actors out there. The majority of them probably more talented than me. But I was given an opportunity. The role of Eileen Wuornos was just one of those roles that come around every once in a while, and I got lucky that I got that shot.
Just one other question before we wrap. What advice do you have for women aiming for leadership positions?
Be resilient. Find your crew, find your team, find and surround yourself by people who make you better, who challenge you, who push you. Always ask yourself, is this where I can bring myself, or is this person making me perform in a way that I could never do on my own? And I think understanding the value of leadership, it's not something that happens in a vacuum. Doesn't happen with one person. It really happens with your village. It happens with constantly being hungry for that voice out there that might be of a different generation than yours, or of a different circumstance than yours, or a different socioeconomic. Surround yourself with people who are, yes, like-minded, but also different people that you can learn from. And never, ever be too proud to say that you were wrong. I find that, I've gotten better at that the older I've gotten. I don't know, something kind of happens when you get a little older and the walls don't seem I don't know, you just don't seem so emotional more anymore about things. And you can take a breath and actually acknowledge when you've been wrong, and then and find great power in that. I once I started doing that, I realized that that was actually a very powerful place to be in. And so I wish somebody told me when I was in my 20s that that was an empowering thing. I think my whole 20s, I just pretended that I was never wrong because it felt vulnerable and it felt like that was where people could, um, I guess, hurt you or get to you. So I guess future leaders, there's no vulnerability in it, and it will actually just make you stronger, and will make you be able to reach a wider. Uh, you'll have a wider reach with people that you really want to have reach with.
Thank you. Thank you for that beauty of the hindsight and foresight. You're really in a unique position of having the expertise as a storyteller, Charlize, to champion women and children, whether as parent, actor, or advocate, and the platform in which to amplify these very powerful messages. Thank you so much. It's been such a lovely opportunity speaking with you and catching up, Charlize.
I am so grateful for this opportunity, and thank you for having me. And I just want to say thank you for the your audience for all the great questions. I love having these conversations. So I'm really grateful that you asked me to be a part of it. It was so nice to meet you personally, well, on Zoom, but nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Charlize. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Keep well. Thank you.